Hi there, I'm Cassidy. A little disclaimer first. This hair, this voice, my co host Hammond, fake. 100% digital illusion. But the debate you're about to hear isn't smoke and mirrors, it's genuine AI reasoning. Unfiltered, uncut, and hopefully a little smarter than your average internet argument. With that, let's get into it. Welcome to the debate. Our focus today, well, it touches on one of the biggest questions imaginable, really digging into the nature of reality itself. The core issue we're going to wrestle with is this. Does the universe around us, its sheer complexity, its apparent beginning, does that logically demand there's an intelligent creator? Or can we explain all these features perfectly well using, natural processes alone? My position is that the evidence really points one way. The fact that everything seems to have a cause, combined with the incredible order we see, it just requires something outside it all, something uncaused, and yes, intelligent to make sense of why anything exists at all.
That's definitely a significant claim. But I'm coming at this maybe more cautiously from an intellectual standpoint. Look, the universe is obviously amazing, incredibly complex. But I'm going to argue that bringing a supernatural creator into the picture doesn't just complicate things unnecessarily, violating that principle of simplicity we often rely on. It actually throws up more logical problems, more paradoxes than it solves. I think we can and probably should look for answers about complexity and cause and effect within the natural world we can observe.
Okay, so my argument really stands on two main ideas, two pillars, if you will. The first tackles that ultimate origin question, what philosophers sometimes call the cosmological argument. Basically, everything we see, everything that could possibly not exist, a person, a building, a tree, it was caused by something before it, right? A tree comes from a seed, the seed from a whole process before that, and so on. Now, that chain of causes, it can't just go back forever. An infinite chain going backwards, well, it logically means things could never get started, so we wouldn't be here now. For time and cause and effect to actually move forward, logic seems to demand that the chain has to stop somewhere. It needs a first point, a starting point that wasn't itself caused by something else. An uncaused cause, you could say. Something whose existence is just necessary, eternal, not dependent on anything else.
Hmm. That idea of an uncaused cause, it sounds neat. I'll give you that. But doesn't it immediately create a kind of, paradox?
Hold that thought for just 1 second, because my second pillar deals with what reality looks like now. This is the argument from design. The universe isn't just here, it's ordered, it's functional, it seems almost purposeful. Think about finding, I don't know, a really complex gadget, like a smartphone, lying on a beach. Your immediate thought isn't, oh, the waves must have washed this together. You instantly know it was designed. You see intention, planning. Now look at the natural world, the unbelievable complexity in DNA, the way vast cosmic systems work together. It shows a level of order that just seems way beyond what you'd expect from pure randomness bumping into matter over time. The way things are put together, how means achieve ends, it strongly points towards an intelligence, an architect behind it all.
Okay, I get the appeal. You see order, you think planner. But where I think your position, as you laid it out, kind of trips up is in how it sets the rules. On one hand, you say everything needs a cause. But then, almost in the same breath, you make a special exception for your creator, calling it uncaused or necessary just by definition. That feels like you're just moving the goalposts, not actually solving the problem. I mean, if we're allowed to say that an eternal, thinking being God can just exist forever without needing a cause, then why can't we ask the question your whole argument was trying to get rid of? Who created the creator? It seems like a logical dead end.
Yeah, that's a very common challenge, but I think it slightly misunderstands what necessary means in this context. When I talk about an uncaused cause, I'm talking about a being whose very nature is to exist. It's not contingent, meaning its existence doesn't depend on anything else. It exists by definition, sort of outside the whole chain of time and cause that governs our physical universe. So, this necessary existence isn't really an exception to the rule everything needs a cause. It's more like the logical requirement for all the other things, the contingent things, to exist in the first place. The creator isn't just some random complicated thing we exempt from the rules. It's supposed to be the very foundation of existence itself.
But why does that foundation of existence have to be intelligent? Why a mind? This brings me to my basic approach here. Occam's razor. The idea that the simplest explanation is often the best. If we can explain the universe's existence and its complexity using straightforward natural processes, even if those processes need huge amounts of time, like evolution or basic physics working things out, then there's no real logical need to add this extra supernatural layer, like a creator. The design argument often feels a bit like arguing from ignorance, doesn't it? Like, well, I can't figure out how this complexity happened naturally, so it must have been designed. The simpler path, the one that makes fewer big assumptions we can't prove, that usually seems like the better way to go.
Okay, let's drill down on this first point then. The logical need for a first cause. Relying on Occam's razor is useful, sure, but sometimes logical necessity has to take priority. And when we look at modern cosmology, the science of the universe's origins, the evidence seems pretty strong, especially from things related to the Big Bang Theory, that space, time, and matter all had a definite beginning. Now, if the universe itself, or even the fundamental laws governing it, started to exist at some point, then logically something outside that system must have kicked it off. If you accept the universe isn't infinitely old, then you're kind of forced logically to accept some kind of initiator that didn't need initiating itself. Without that necessary starting point, the whole structure seems like it couldn't get going, and nothing would exist.
Right. I agree that an infinite regress, going back forever, is philosophically, well, messy. I get that. But here's the thing. If you're allowed to propose an uncreated, eternal thinking thing, a mind, why is it logically impossible to propose, say, an eternal, uncreated set of physical laws? Or maybe an eternal, uncaused quantum field from which the universe popped into existence? You're basically defining consciousness as the necessary starter. But isn't a conscious mind a vastly more complicated thing to imagine existing eternally and uncaused compared to just, say, fundamental physical rules? It feels like we're swapping one mystery, where did eternal matter or laws come from, for an even bigger, harder mystery, where did an eternal complex mind come from? The burden of proof, it seems to me, is on explaining why that starter has to be intelligent, not just necessary.
Well, the need for intelligence comes directly from that second point, the complexity and order we see. It's not just that the universe is ordered, it's the precision of that order. People often talk about the fine-tuning of the universe. We're talking about fundamental forces and constants like gravity or the strength of electromagnetism compared to gravity. These values have to be set within an incredibly, unbelievably narrow range for things like stars to form, for carbon chemistry to work, for life as we know it to even be possible. It's like trying to hit a tiny target on the other side of the cosmos. Pure random chance, given how unlikely it is mathematically, just seems completely inadequate to explain this level of calibration towards, well, outcomes like us. That kind of specificity really does suggest deliberate intent, a mind, not just some impersonal natural process unfolding.
Okay, that fine-tuning argument is definitely the strongest version of the design case, I'll grant you. But modern physics does offer some plausible natural explanations. The kind of standard scientific idea floated in response is the multiverse. The idea is, what if our universe is just one of maybe a huge, maybe infinite number of universes, and each of these universes has slightly different physical laws, different constants? If that's the case, then the fact that we happen to find ourselves in the one kind of universe that can support life isn't some miracle pointing to a designer. It's just a selection effect. We could only exist in a universe like this one, so observing our seemingly fine-tuned world becomes, well, almost inevitable given that we're here to observe it, not necessarily proof of a tuner.
But that approach, it relies on bringing in potentially infinite numbers of completely speculative things, entire universes we can't see or test, just to avoid introducing one necessary being. That feels like it violates Occam's razor more dramatically, doesn't it? You're multiplying entities way beyond what's needed or observable. And besides, even if a multiverse exists, it just pushes the question back. What created the multiverse making machine? And what fine-tuned the rules of that mechanism that supposedly spits out all these universes? You still haven't actually solved the ultimate origin problem. You've just kicked it up a level into something even more abstract and frankly unprovable.
Well, we're always looking for the simplest explanation that fits what we see. But let's circle back to that philosophical issue I brought up earlier, the complexity of the designer itself. If we take someone like Richard Dawkins's point seriously, any being capable of designing the incredibly complex laws, constants, and initial conditions of our universe must itself be vastly more complex than the universe it created, right? So if complexity needs a designer, then who designed the super complex designer? You fall right back into that infinite regress problem, but this time with ever more complex creators, which completely undermines your initial goal of finding a simple necessary starting point.
Right. My response there has to be quite specific. The necessary being, the uncaused cause, isn't complex in the same way the universe is complex. Physical complexity, like a watch or a phone, involves different parts put together according to outside rules, things that could be otherwise. The necessary being, as the absolute foundation of reality, would have to be in its fundamental nature maximally simple. Pure existence, maybe, with no parts, the source from which all the complexity we see originates. So the rule, complex things need a designer, wouldn't apply to the designer itself, because its nature is fundamentally different. Simple, necessary, the source of structure, not composed of it.
That definition, while I see how it works philosophically, it does rely on a meaning of simplicity that feels very counterintuitive when we talk about intelligence. I mean, the only intelligence we actually know exists in highly organized, incredibly complex systems, specifically brains. To just define an ultimate, simple, necessary intelligence into existence seems a bit like defining away the problem of complex order that made you think you needed a creator in the first place.
Well, maybe let's shift focus slightly to the actual result of this supposed design. This leads us straight into our third major point of contention, the problem of imperfection, or more starkly, the problem of evil. And this, I agree, is a very serious challenge to the idea of a perfect, all good, all powerful creator.
Exactly. If we're seriously arguing for an intelligent designer, we have to look at the quality of the design, right? Why is a world supposedly made by an all powerful, all loving God absolutely riddled with suffering, horrific things like disease, natural disasters, cruelty, predation? The sheer amount of suffering and, frankly, evil in the world creates this unavoidable dilemma. Either the designer is powerful enough to stop all this horror, but chooses not to, which makes him sound rather malevolent, or at least indifferent. Or the designer wants to stop it but can't, which means they aren't really all powerful. The actual stay of the world seems to point towards either a cruel designer or maybe more plausibly, sheer indifference and randomness, meaning no good designer, at least.
And it forces us to think beyond just a simple watchmaker type of design argument. It makes us ask, well, what might the purpose of this creation be? Now, while the existence of so much suffering definitely makes it hard, maybe impossible, to simply conclude that the architect is the perfectly good, all powerful God, often described in theology, it doesn't automatically erase the need for an architect altogether. We still have to consider maybe the philosophical implications of creating beings with real freedom. If the goal was to create creatures capable of genuine love, moral choice, maybe growth, then perhaps those creatures needed to exist in a world where choices have real, sometimes terrible consequences.
So the free will defense. Okay, but that choice allowing suffering for the sake of free will that really doesn't explain things like childhood cancer or earthquakes or tsunamis. Those have absolutely nothing to do with human moral choices. And besides, if the designer's truly all powerful, couldn't they have designed a universe where free will was possible without quite so much horrific, seemingly pointless suffering? The sheer scale of agony that appears completely unrelated to human action really undermines the idea of a necessary benevolent intelligence. It points much more strongly towards a process that's just, well, arbitrary and fundamentally indifferent to the well-being of the things it produces.
I absolutely concede that the problem of evil means we have to seriously refine or maybe question our understanding of the designer's nature. Perhaps the architect's goals aren't primarily about human comfort. Or maybe the universe is set up as a system designed for, say, stability and scientific discovery, which inherently means having fixed, indifferent physical laws that sometimes, inevitably, cause disasters. But the core evidence for design, those incredibly fine tuned laws, the complex information coding in life, that evidence still seems to require some kind of intelligence to set up that initial structure, to establish that relationship between means and ends in the first place. The existence of imperfection challenges the character, perhaps, of the architect, but maybe not the necessity of an architect to get the whole system started and structured.
Look, I acknowledge the world shows us organized complexity, and the search for a first cause is a deep and important intellectual journey. However, I'm still not convinced that the only logical way out of an infinite past is to introduce this ultimate intelligent being that you define right from the start as exempt from the very rules of causality and complexity that you use to argue for it. It feels like replacing the mystery of the universe's origin with an even deeper, perhaps self-contradictory mystery of an eternal, super complex, yet simple mind. Natural causes may be operating eternally in some form, or perhaps generating countless universes through some unknown mechanism that still feels like the more economical and scientifically conservative explanation by default.
And I still maintain that the universe having a definite beginning in the past, combined with its truly stunningly precise structure, that cosmic bullseye analogy, logically pushes us towards accepting an uncaused, necessary intelligence behind it all. We just see too many indicators of, well, intent, or at least extreme fine tuning, especially in those fundamental constants, to just brush off the designer idea as merely shifting complexity or an incredibly lucky accident. And while we absolutely have to wrestle with the moral questions about this architect, the basic requirements of causality and the evidence of design still seem, to me, to point very strongly towards some kind of non contingent external foundation for reality.
Hmm. What this whole exchange really highlights, I think, is that when we ask these ultimate questions about existence, we really push up against the limits of both our logic and our observations. We've got these arguments from logical necessity that seem to demand some kind of uncaused foundation. And then we have arguments based on what we see and the principle of simplicity, which lean towards natural explanations. Both sides offer, credible ways to frame the evidence. It ultimately leaves the decision about which picture of reality makes the most sense to the reasoned judgment of each person listening.
There you have it. What do you think? Does God exist? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. Thanks for watching. Until next time, think on.